When I was 8 years old, I remember finally getting to the Victory Road in Pokémon Diamond. I took a single step in the cave, and I got an encounter. Across my screen comes a Graveler of a slightly different colour. I remember thinking to myself, if it lives in Earthquake from my very overleveled Torterra, I'd catch it because it deserved it. It didn't survive the Earthquake. Little did I know, I had just encountered my first ever shiny Pokémon. Over 500 shinies later, and I can safely say that I'm a veteran shiny hunter. But what's even the point? Shinies have no in-game difference than regular Pokemon, and they have no real-world value either, and yet you pour hours and hours into getting one. Why did Game Freak even add them in the first place? And you might think this just boils down to it being a weird hobby, but the more I looked into it, the more I realised it isn't really about Pokemon at all. So before I get ahead of myself, let me explain a bit about what a shiny Pokemon actually is. A shiny Pokemon is basically just a rare form of a Pokemon that, to be put a bit simply, it's just a palette change. It's called a shiny, as when you use it in battle, a few sparkles appear around the Pokemon. The term shiny itself is actually completely fan-made, and it wouldn't be an official term until 2009, even though they existed all the way from 1999 with the release of Gold and Silver. At this time, they were simply referred to in the game code as rare, and no mention of shinies whatsoever. At this time, shinies had a rate of 1 in 8,192, meaning it would take around 70 hours of running around in the grass, or the water, or a cave, or wherever, to reach the expected odds. Over the many years, Game Freak has drastically increased the odds to find a shiny by introducing different methods such as chain fishing or Masuda egg breeding, as well as increasing the base odds to 1 in 4,096. Shinies are now a core part of Pokemon as a franchise, and they have been for almost 30 years. But why were they even added? To answer this question, we're going to need to go back a bit. Back before Pokemon was even a concept at all the way to the 1970s. In 1974, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson decided to release a tabletop box set game, which ended up changing gaming forever. This game, if you haven't guessed, was Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I could dedicate an entire video just on how Dungeons & Dragons changed games forever, but the relevant part to this topic is how they implemented rare items into the game. Every single monster in the game has a treasure type. The treasure type of the monster determines your chance of getting something good, and the harder the monster, the better the treasure type. You'd end up rolling a dice and checking the associated table, and if you get very lucky, you'd pull something rare like a magic item. This is the first proper instance of chance-based loot in the game, and it only grew from there. In 1990, a group of university students decided to build a game called Angband. It's an ASCII-based game, meaning everything is represented by keyboard characters, and the player is represented with an @ sign. This game completely revolutionized a few different ways games were made, but by far the most notable, and the one we're interested in, is the loot system. It used colour to represent different types of loot, such as grey being used for common, or blue for magic. While this was a pretty simple system, it ended up being a great foundation for future projects, and 6 years later, David Brevik used it to build his entire loot system for Diablo. And I don't mean he took inspiration, he literally used it as the foundation for the loot system.
What about loot rarity colors? Did you guys take that chart from anywhere, or was that invented in Diablo?
That was, it was really, that came from a game called Angband.
Diablo is a dungeon crawling game where the entire loop is pretty easy. You go in, you kill monsters, you get loot, and you get stronger. That's literally it. The simplicity is what gave it its charm though, and it was an instant commercial success. Critics praised it for its dark atmospheric world, randomized loot, and very addictive gameplay. But the reason we care about Diablo at all is to do with its loot. David took Angband's colour system and expanded on it massively. He kept the white or grey, meaning common items, and blue meaning magic items, but he added more tiers, with the highest tier being unique, represented by a gold colour. And unlike Angband, this wasn't just a trivial addition. Brevik intentionally designed the game around chasing low chance items and rare loot. And while the uniques in the game were by far the strongest items you could get, their real allure was just how rare they were. Every game up to this point has had pretty much the same mechanics baked into the game. Rare items are worth more because they improve your gameplay and make you feel more powerful in the game. But 3 years after Diablo, Game Freak released their second installment of games, Gold and Silver, and they completely changed this rule. Pokemon Gold and Silver added a lot to the Pokemon franchise. 100 new Pokemon, evolutions for older fan favourites, breeding, and most importantly, colour. The Game Boy Color was released the year before in 1998, and Game Freak intended to show off their new capabilities in one of their flagship games. Alongside new vibrant towns and routes, a specific area just north of Mahogany Town acted as their main display of this new edition, the Lake of Rage. The Lake of Rage didn't add much to the story. You battle a few grunts here, and are directed by the game to eventually explore the lake itself. In the middle of the lake, however, sits a Gyarados, but not a Gyarados the player would have seen before. Upon encountering it and entering the battle, you're met with a bright red Gyarados, and a few sparkles to accompany it. Most people at the time thought this was a special one-off Pokemon, just like the Crystal Onyx from the anime, but this was a shiny. The game only referred to this as the Red Gyarados, and never indicated that every single Pokemon in the game actually had an alternative form, just like the Gyarados. This means that most people, while owning a shiny themselves, had no idea that shiny Pokemon even existed. With the World Wide Web being in its infancy stage, there wasn't a lot of information about this new type of Gyarados. Unknown to players, shiny Pokemon had a rate of 1 in 8,192, making it rare enough that the average person wouldn't find it, but common enough that some people would, which is really all that matters. The earliest discussions of shiny Pokemon spread through word of mouth. By 2001, guides were starting to appear explaining exactly what this Red Gyarados was. Even 2 years after the release, many people still didn't know what a shiny Pokemon was, and had no idea of the exact rarity. While players didn't understand exactly what shinies were, the question we're interested in is, did Game Freak understand what they'd created? There's no old official statements or interviews that explain why shinies were added into the game, although there's many fan theories about it. A popular one is that Game Freak just wanted a theatrical moment to display its new colour technology in the game. Regular Gyarados obviously wouldn't work, as its blue colour wouldn't really stand out in the lake, and so they just made it red to look better visually. And then to kind of explain this mechanic more, they created shiny Pokemon. My personal belief is that Game Freak saw the success of other various games that had rare items in them, and decided to implement their own mechanic that would drastically increase the replayability of their games. Whatever theory you believe, Gold and Silver proved something nothing else in the gaming industry had done at the time, which is creating something rare that had no functional value whatsoever worked, and the entire value came from it being rare in the first place. But the question I want to answer isn't what Game Freak created, it's why it works so well. To find out this answer, I need to introduce you to a psychologist named B.F. Skinner. In the 50s, Skinner was experimenting with pigeons and levers. When he made the lever give the pigeon food every single time it was pressed, the pigeons would press it just when they were hungry and then they'd stop, which created a pretty easily predictable loop of behaviour and reward. But when he made the reward random, sometimes one press, sometimes hundreds before it would give food, the pigeons wouldn't stop pressing the lever. Even when they were already rewarded with food, they kept pressing. The unpredictability itself is what made it addictive. This is called the variable ratio reinforcement, and the exact same concept that slot machines, social media, and loot boxes use, and even shiny hunting. Every encounter is essentially a lever pull, and with every pull of the lever, we're given a chance to be rewarded with our treat. So does this mean we're just pigeons? Well, kind of. The pigeons initially pressed the lever out of necessity, as they needed food. We don't need a shiny. As mentioned before, it doesn't actually provide any benefit from regular Pokemon apart from appearance. Despite this, the same mechanism keeping the pigeons pulling the lever is the exact same one that pulls us back to doing encounters for shiny Pokemon. The difference is what we're actually chasing, and it isn't really the Pokemon at all. Most shiny hunters will value certain shinies over others. There are definitely elements of favoritism amongst that, like my favourite being Phantom, but most hunters generally tend to appreciate and respect harder shiny hunts more, like the very coveted shiny Manaphy. It's because the shiny itself represents the time and effort put into hunting the Pokemon, proof that you committed to something and achieved a goal you set out to do. The Pokeball just acts as a way to feel as though you've invested your time and have something tangible to show for it. And once the entire gaming world figured this out, they ran with it. If you fast forward 20 years after shinies were introduced to the modern day, you can see just how deeply the mechanic has embedded itself in gaming culture. Loot boxes are a prime example. They appear in dozens of popular games, and most of the times they're only rewarding you with cosmetic appearances. Counter-Strike has built a multi-million-dollar market on this entire premise. Some skins in the game are now worth more than a car or even a house, purely because of the scarcity and desire for the item. The variable ratio reinforcement applies just as much today as it did in 1999. It's still just people pulling the same lever as the pigeon, hoping for a reward, even when there's no necessity for it. The main difference is the currency. With Pokemon, it was just time. You can invest as much time as you wanted, and with enough of it, you would almost certainly achieve whatever shiny you wanted. As games have become more commercialized, that currency became real-world money. It's the same lever but with a different cost. So, to answer the question as to why people can't stop shiny hunting Pokemon, it's because it wasn't about the Pokemon. Game Freak stumbled onto a concept 27 years ago that the gaming industry still holds as a core philosophy today. That the rare alone defies the value, and the reward is the feeling of relief and accomplishment after a long hunt. Humans will invest hundreds of hours into something with no benefit whatsoever, purely because of each press of the lever, the next press might be the one that they're awarded. I think the thing that separates shinies from other games is the attachment you form towards the Pokemon you spend hours finding, and the memories you get while hunting them. When I was around 13 years old, I found a shiny Suicune in Pokemon Mega Ruby. It was one of my first ever proper shiny hunts I'd ever done, and I was so excited that I ran upstairs to tell my sister. I ran a bit too fast, and I fell all the way back down the stairs, breaking my toe. Even as I was falling down the stairs, I made sure my DS didn't get knocked around, so it wouldn't break and I could still catch it. Or the fact that I found back-to-back shiny Pidgeys in Pokemon Soul Silver. And the odds are so astronomical that it's not something I really brag about because I have no definitive proof of them being caught back-to-back. But I know it's true, and it's one of my favourite shinies I've ever found. And I think that's why a lot of people end up hunting. So while we might just be pigeons pushing a lever, and that might just be in our nature, the reward was never meaningless. Just like how pigeons valued food, as humans we value experience and memories. And finding a shiny Pokemon gives you both.